Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to our afternoon panel. Thank you for your patience. My name is Vanessa Valdez. I am the Associate Provost for Community Engagement here at the City College of New York. It is a pleasure to welcome you for the afternoon session of this conference. I am going to do the following. I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to read a bit about what this panel is. We have two hard stops with this panel, one at 1:40, which will connote the end of the conversation. We have a second hard stop for 2 o'clock, which means that will be from 1:40 to the 2, we'll have Q&A. 2 o'clock is the hard stop for the ends of this panel. So just want to let everyone know that. Keep me accountable, please. Um, I appreciate you. So, with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. To my immediate left is Kate Asher. She is the Milstein Professor of Urban Development at Columbia's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. We have to her left Tara Duvivier. Do I pronounce it? All right, I try. Fancy. Senior planner for the Pratt Center for Community Development. We have Barbara Askins, who's the president and CEO of the 125th Street Business Improvement District. We have Timothy Fry, Director of Special Projects and Strategic Planning for the Landmarks Preservation Commission. And we have Ty Jones, Producing Artistic Director of the Classical Theater of Harlem. Please give our panelists applause. Defining and retaining neighborhood identity and planning for growth is the title of this panel. The description I received reads, neighborhood identity is determined by many elements: historic buildings, local businesses, gathering places, public spaces, cultural communities, urban design, and heritage tourism. So much of what helps define a neighborhood and make it valuable is intangible, such as creative culture, local economies, and community identity. These elements are both critical to a community's character and must be considered when planning community development. Using West Harlem as a case study, speakers will discuss the preservation of Harlem's historic fabric and heritage and the value of Harlem's creative arts and culture to stabilize neighborhoods and foster an equitable ecosystem. This panel will ask what measures can be taken to ensure the economic development benefits the existing community. How can a community build on its existing cultural and historical character to encourage investment to create a unique place which is accessible, inclusive, and sustainable? So with that, I would just like to ask each of you to you have microphones on the tables between you, to just briefly describe your role at this moment, or what you see in terms of Harlem and its future growth. Briefly, this is like a couple of sentences.
I'll just sort of say who I am. I don't really necessarily have a vision for the growth, but I am a resident of Hamilton Heights, Sugar Hill. I live on 147th Street. I teach at Columbia, so I walk through this neighborhood all the time. And I do live in a home that we did restore, and I did use the historic tax credit, although I'm not an expert. So I'm very keen on what the state and the city and the federal government can do to incentivize retention of these homes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually going to out myself and say I'm not a West Harlem resident. I'm actually a Brooklyn resident. So the perspective, and when I was asked to be on this, it was not made aware to me that, or they didn't know that I was a Brooklyn resident. So I'm going to offer, I guess, maybe a cautionary tale or a different perspective. Where I live in Clinton Hill. I live like 2 blocks away from where Notorious B.I.G. grew up. And to be in that neighborhood and to see the way that people are trading and also commodifying his imagery and how we have the iconography in the area, but yet we do not have the same residents that were there. His home was sold in 2021, again, a second time for $2 million. Rents are $3,000 in the area on average for 1 bedroom. And to see that, people trying to retain that iconography, but not trying to actually retain the people is something that incenses me constantly. So I can provide that perspective, but I'm just really interested in this conversation because I do think culture to a community, especially community so rich like Harlem, is really important for us to be discussing.
Thank you.
So what I would say is I couldn't figure out why I was on this panel either because the the Business Improvement District is from Morningside to Fifth Avenue. But we do on 125th Street, we work with West Harlem through the community board and it was explained to me that there are things that we've learned that we could share and also look at how maybe we can look further to working together. So many of you may remember in 2008, 125th Street was zoned to be a cultural destination. And a lot of things were put on the book that have not gone into fruition. One is the cultural bonus. It's there, but it hasn't been used. And we have learned that things we put on the book sometimes don't play out in business sense. And one particular thing we push for, and we need to push for again around culture, the city only gave us for performances. We need performance and production. We need performance and production so that other people in the arts can participate in the growth. As it relates to housing, COVID was a setback, but it also created opportunities. Many of the buildings across 125th Street are smaller. They don't have the density. So density doesn't have to just be office. It can be incentivized for supportive housing, for some of the social needs that we have, and also to bring in the opportunity to start looking at the oversaturation factor.
Thank you.
And hi, again, I'm Tim Fry, and on behalf of Chair Carroll, thank you so much for inviting us here. I think in terms of, well, in thinking about growth, I sort of want to make a shameless plug for the Historic Preservation Grant Program, because in thinking about growth, I also think about our program where since the late 70s, the Historic Preservation Grant Program has been offering grants to nonprofits and to low-income homeowners throughout the city to primarily for facade restoration. It's a community development block grant program, and it's administered through our office. Over the last 30 years, I believe the agency has given 31 grants to Harlem residents and non-for-profits, and the most recent recipient has been NAMA. And last December, they received a grant for facade restoration, stoop restoration. And we, again, thinking about growth, we'd love to support sort of the existing residents, the existing cultural institutions, and find a way sort of in our limited role of, regulating or designating historic resources and regulating them through the permit review process, that we're able to sort of balance that by providing those incentives so that those sort of large costs can be balanced through financial assistance.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Ty Jones, the producing artistic director of the Classical Theater of Harlem. Thank you for the invitation. I think we could be helpful in this conversation because we do want a home, and the idea behind it is fueled behind history, preserving history, while also forging a new future. So, for example, there have been a number of projects all across the New York City that have been done in the arts world. So there is the Perlman Center, $500 million project. There's the Little Island. I think that was around 300 million or so, and they were vanity projects. So be it. And so what I thought was to take some of these arts organizations who have been resourceful with very few resources, and how do we work together to build a Harlem Classical Arts Complex, sort of a building for the 10-year-old version, an artistic home for the 10-year-old version of all of us. Because not all of us are going to be athletes and stuff like that. We need to be able to have access to these things. So the idea would be to take these venerable arts institutions, work together, be in one building, right-size that building, and do it in such a way that is part of an ecosystem. So the space that we would love to have is on 141st and St. Nick. So the idea is that there are 2 schools on that block, a parking garage on that block, Harlem School of the Arts on that block, and then having the Harlem Classical Arts Complex where you have chamber music, opera, and classical theater of Harlem. So foot traffic is there because of the students and the kids. Parents come pick them up. They can we'll program things over at Harlem Classical Arts Complex for them. And then that's foot traffic to the burgeoning community that's happening, the business community on Amsterdam Avenue. On top of that, we've got City College right there. We're essentially trying to make sure we kind of create what's been known as a model block, right? Now, what I mean about right sizing that is that I think leadership has to play a role in making sure that what is built can be replicated in other cities who have innovated, places in their cities. And then we can create an ecosystem of performing arts organizations across the United States if we can model this correctly. Now, the main thing that has to be employed is patience. It isn't going to happen overnight. All progress begins with a conversation, and we got to have the kind of conversations between, multiple folks, including politicians and local community boards and things like that. But I welcome that conversation, especially when you're rooted in history. And a history is as rich as Harlem. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to ask all of you, each of you touched on this a little bit. And again, returning to the title of this, defining, retaining neighborhood identity / planning for growth. What do you see, or can we speak about some of the challenges perhaps on either sides of those hyphens? I.e., we know of Harlem, everyone has ideas about what Harlem has been, ideas about what Harlem means to them, and ideas about where it should go. So could we speak a little bit about what perhaps are some of the challenges and opportunities as we move forward, as we are planning for growth? And this is to anyone. Also, I encourage you to also speak to each other and pose conversation to each other. I will guide. But it doesn't, y'all don't have to wait for me, I promise.
I'm happy to say something. I just have to tell you that I think that idea rocks, okay? I don't carry cards, but we should be in touch because I think that is a fabulous idea, knowing nothing about it. But one of the things I would say, and I'm not here for cultural stuff, I know more about the historic side, is that it's a question of scale. And when you have a lot of organizations that are in different places who all have to deal with real estate and maintenance and marketing and everything else, it's too much. It's too much. I was married to an arts consultant who did this for a living. It's too much. And if you could realize that vision, both physically and, philosophically, it actually could turn into something that's more than, I think, the sum of its parts. So I would love to talk about that. Because I don't know about growth, the thing about growth, I know the economic development side, and a lot of the economic development side touches back on the first conversations that were had today about more people, more density, and is this what the community wants or doesn't want? And that has to do with what kind of retail you have here and how much tourism you have here. So to some extent, it does relate to that sort of fabric. I don't necessarily think that an idea like this is pushing growth in a way that's going to undermine in any way the area or result in gentrification or anything like that. I think it's just a fabulous idea.
I think it also just stabilizes organizations that have been doing the work for decades. I have a friend who is the executive director at 651 Arts in Brooklyn, and they've been around for 30 years, and only this year they will be in their first permanent home. So this is an organization that's been doing all of this work, has this national reputation at this point, and it has taken them this long. While we can celebrate the fact that they do have this, because now that they'll have an established space for themselves, to have to see that. That journey to get there, especially knowing that these neighborhoods are changing, is, I think, a big challenge for a lot of arts organizations who continue to do the work. It doesn't make sense for an organization who's trying to work with their constituents to say, well, now we're going to, they need to balance their resources. It's either you're going to operate or you're going to buy a building so you can operate. And I think we just don't do enough, specifically, I think, on the city level in providing space. We know that we talk about their city-owned land. Not all of it is suitable for housing. Can we think about it in other ways, suitable for other uses? There are organizations that are in these communities doing the work. Why aren't we providing them a space in order for them to have a home, to do the work, and raise some money, leverage their resources? I feel like this is something that we don't really focus on so much because we're so much in this housing crisis mode, but understanding that in order to live in a community or to have a community, you need other resources as well. So I think that's something that we should be thinking about as we think about growth and sustainability as well, because a lot of these groups that maybe are at a point where they would like to purchase can't because they've been priced out.
Right.
So I'm going to start off with some of the challenges and take it to a personal level. And when I say personal, I mean personal among us, ourselves. The first thing is we have to be able to work together better. We need to work together better. We need to share information. Everybody needs to know what the other one is doing so you can basically understand where potential opportunities may be. And I say that because we come from back, I started working with the Harlem Community on 125th Street in the late 1980s. And what we want and what we need, I have sat through so many of these sessions over and over and over and over again. We know we want affordable housing. We know we want arts and culture. We know we want to save and preserve our community. But what's the plan? What's the action? How do we get there? How do we move the needle? And that means us coming together and stop fighting amongst ourselves. You know, some real true talk and real facts. Because when business people do business, they're looking at the hard facts. They're looking at, do the numbers make sense? And then they make decisions based on that. And how do we incorporate the social needs in with the business needs? Business people need to understand the value of the arts more. They need to understand the value of bringing services, not oversaturating our area, because what happens is the state or the city pay a big amount of money for a service. And so the landlord is just going to always take it. We need to come up with a plan to integrate, you know, where these services should be, how we can bring the arts in, and art people need to learn more about how to do business. So when they go to the table to do these deals like you're talking about, you can talk about it in terms of return on investment, because that's what's going to get the attention of the business owner. You come with a plan, you have your plan laid out, you can show your projections for 10 years. As it was told to me once, Barbara, we don't mind losing money. We just want to know how long. How long are we going to be giving money? It's never going to turn a profit, so I can know how to move. So business people learning more about the arts, and art people learning more about how to do business, so you can have those conversations and create the opportunities. I think we have a real value here because COVID has forced us to come together, and somebody, which it cannot be me, I'm already overloaded, but somebody should put together a way for those conversations to happen so we can start moving into action.
Thank you.
So it's hard for me to think about obstacles in terms of what we do at LPC because of our limited role as an agency, but I guess turning it back on ourselves, like we wouldn't want to be an obstacle as a city agency. And so I think like when we are thinking about the ways we can be more transparent and more predictable and more accessible in our work in engaging with the public, engaging with property owners, with developers to ensure that we're providing the technical assistance that's needed to facilitate the types of projects the community would want to see. That's where we would ideally want to sort of remove us as an obstacle. And I think a great example of that is recently some of you, or many of you may be aware of the Vulnerable Building Action Plan that Mayor Adams released or promoted in April, which was a combination plan through DOB and LPC to stop sort of the deferred maintenance, the negligent contractor work, and sort of the unknown structural issues around our aging infrastructure and our aging buildings. And so West Harlem in particular, but all Harlem community organizations were instrumental in providing feedback to city agencies on how we could all work better together, how we could communicate more efficiently. And that way we have now a plan where we have enhanced engineers, we have a better sort of network to be in touch with each other to ensure that this work doesn't fall by the wayside. But not only that, we have stronger enforcement and collaborative enforcement with DOB to ensure that these vulnerable buildings aren't demolished, even though they're protected under the landmarks law. And again, because the community was instrumental in helping us sort of achieve that plan, I think that was another way where we could break ourselves down as an obstacle or a perceived obstacle and help sort of facilitate a more collaborative approach with the community.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you talking about those obstacles. Forgive me, I just have a question to the room. Given that we are together to speak about these things, how many of us, just by a show of hands, have felt the frustrations of what it is to go up against obstacles, or what it is about affordable housing, or preserving things. Anybody that you can see? All right, so can I imagine that's why many of you are here. And Ms. Haskins, one of the things that you brought up is really very, very, I think, poignant. And this is what it is. I actually do think that, and I'm just going to speak for Black folks for a second here and shut me down if you need me to, but if you need to, is that we did do all that. We do plan, and we actually do try to get together, and we actually come with real ideas. And we're talking about the power of people to put certain obstacles in place before we can go and actually take action. So what I've noticed is that, yes, we all have these frustrations around these things when it comes to housing and arts, buildings, things of that nature. But I think the tough part is being able to have the ability to stomach the fight when the obstacles are thrown up. And oftentimes, economic reasons, we can call it whatever it is, and maybe it is sort of racial insensitivities as well too. These obstacles are real, and they're powerful, hard to point out. And when you're trying to create relationships with people to make X, Y, and Z happen, sometimes your own team is like, why are you making relationships with those folks, right? And then so that's why I said earlier, it takes patience, and power, frankly. And I hear you loud and clear that when we're far more powerful together than being separated. But I do 100% believe that we have put these plans in place and we have tried to execute them, but there have been obstacles, and we just got to continue to fight those obstacles.
So I want to piggyback on that, okay, and call out one of the obstacles: government, okay, and I'm saying that because, number one, it's like when you put together your plans and you can go to a city agency, and we just went through this. We came through a great plan that we thought could help with rezoning to allow incentives for small businesses, local small businesses, rezoning to allow for more density so we could get more culture. They agreed that all that was a great plan. The response was, that is not on our agenda right now, and we don't have the resources, and so then you go back to, I'm like cutting through trying to figure out how to go through this. So then you go back to your elected officials and stuff. So then you have to educate your elected officials. This is not what they do. So you have to then, that's time taken, educate them so they can speak on your behalf. I'm in a better position because, we're public-private partnership. So what we decided to do is to try to put together a whole plan, get a couple of developers to do it, and then go back and try to then use our resources, our contacts with the mayor to see can we push it through. But that's what's going to happen. We've run into it with city planning. Every agency, when you go with your plan, then it's not a part of their agenda. So I think talking more, with each other, and sharing, because all of us have, sometimes people get breakthrough. What did you do? How did you get through? Sometimes it's just pure political. We wanted a self-interest. We wanted 125th Street to have cultural advertising signage that we would then be able to just give money to small businesses. We're going to take some of the money and just give it to them. They came back to us and told us only Times Square can have lighting. So government is a really big obstacle that we don't look at, and I'm starting to look at it first now instead of at the end after I get my project together, to try to start seeing how we can do it. And so I agree with you. It's just first understanding what all those obstacles are, and every developer is not a non-friendly developer. Some have self-interest, but others too are looking for guidance from us. People come to your community, they're looking for opportunities. We have to show them and we have to guide them.
So I was just gonna add to that, Barbara. Is it on? Anybody can hear. You're right about understanding government and the role it plays, but I think really to understand those relationships in government is like, I'm not sure if this is maybe. Can you hear from that one? Yeah, that's what I thought. Government is it's a tool. Government, government gets told what to do and will put up obstacles because it's trying to keep its job and has all these equity issues and everything else. But the thing that's happened in the cultural sector, and this is why I was so interested in your idea, there's a network of power in this city. Let's not kid ourselves. And money speaks. And the reason you get some of these great culturalists, I mean, look at Lincoln Center. How did Lincoln Center happen? Because there was a ton of, kind of rich people's money that wanted to show that we were, could compete with the Soviet Union or whatever the hell was going on in the 60s, right? And so understanding that network, because the great arts and cultural things, where did the Shed come from? All of a sudden, we develop Hudson Yards and we have a new performing arts institution that's totally solvent on day one. Like, think about it. So I think it's a great idea, but I think thinking about, to your point, Barbara, about the political connections and networks that drive this city. I mean, I wouldn't blame the bureaucrats, honestly. It's other stuff that pushes them to do or not do. That's my experience. I worked in the Bloomberg administration for EDC. And so I think it's important to understand that too and try to see if you can play that game.
Yeah, but then there's also the challenge. I think a lot of this is something that I was working on. A lot of Black-led organizations, nonprofits, are funded far less than white-led organizations. There is, I think, the structural racism. There's a perception of ability, capacity. Again, still demonstrating having done work in these communities with very little resources for decades. I know a lot of nonprofit boards. There is a business savvy there because they are the ones who have to raise the money. So I don't know if it's necessarily a lack of understanding of business on the arts end. I think a lot of it is more on the developer end, on the owner end, who don't really see a value in arts in just the fact that it could stabilize your neighborhood. So you may not be seeing necessarily a fiduciary return. You're not going to see dollars in your pocket. You'll see your revenue because you're going to be renting to an organization who's going to be paying rent. But if you're expecting some big windfall from a nonprofit organization providing services to a community, it's just that the priorities are not aligned. But I do think there needs to be definitely more incentive for those developers to have that, to understand what the value could be to have these organizations within their developments. But I also think that, unfortunately, government priority and other parties need to be there and need to be present to encourage that as well.
So I'm so happy you said that, because that is exactly where we get lost with the arguments you just gave for the arts and arguments I just gave for business, and we have not made that come together. It still comes down to mortgages have to be paid, this has to be paid, and all of that. And what I'm finding with government, I'm saying government just as a generic word. Kate, I remember you in Bloomberg. I didn't get them lightings on the Bloomberg. So, but what I'm saying is that government has to provide more of an incentive that allow the developers to want to, work with the not-for-profit cultural organizations. The limitation is too low. The limitation is too high for this community. That's the position I've come to.
Yeah, but I also feel like the developers, they see the value in it enough for it to benefit them. So, for example, I know it didn't go through, but I used to work for the Manhattan Borough President's office. I worked under Gail Brewer, and when Lennox Terrace, the application was put up, one of the things that the developer was offering, was when they were redeveloping and going to create that commercial corridor, was a hall of fame. So it's okay, you were going to put Black people on the wall, but you weren't going to but what are you doing to keep the Black people in the neighborhood? So I think that's really, they're willing to do enough in terms of the government's eyes to make it appear that they're doing something that will be of benefit to the community. But I want to say I do agree that the government should be doing more, but I think ultimately there's just a lack of value that people place on cultural markings within a neighborhood, especially within Black neighborhoods. But then whenever everyone's gone, or when they see that people are moving to the area for that reason, they will do just enough. They'll put just enough Biggie murals up, and some of them are, neighborhood based by people who knew him. But then there's a kid's clothing store that's clearly white owned with a Biggie. Come on. So there is, it's just also their ownership around that too. You would have called the police on him probably, but then, 30 years ago, but now it's all good. It's so great. He's so great. Hate to harp on Biggie. I love him. But it's just that idea that always, when I think about culture and neighborhoods, how much people are willing to accept in exchange for what they think they can get or what they can value.
Right. Right. Ty, I want to give you, it's 1:42.
Okay, may I say one last thing and then
Yes.
I'll go? Is that, yeah, well said. We, I think, are going to essentially experience things that we've already experienced. So, for example, those gestures are made to placate certain people. Martin Luther King himself, in his like the final 6 months of his life, said, "I think I have." I'm paraphrasing here. "I've led my people into a burning building." And so there is something to be said about our social integration, but there must be a focused conversation on the economic aspect of it.
Thank you.
So, and with that said, I do believe that folks who are in this room, on this panel, have done that work. We're smart enough, we've got the abilities, and we have put forth all of those papers or whatever proposals we put forth. But we know that there is this sort of invisible sort of line that we have to cross of folks who make decisions, the real estate folks who run New York City, and whether or not what we're doing matters to them. So, yeah, it is about relationship building. And ultimately, I'm going to repeat what I said before. And I think this is the way New York works. It's about power. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This one works.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to give a proposal to the audience. Anybody that have a project together that they want to see if they can get into a space on 125th Street, please send it to me and I can carry it through. I have the relationships. I hear what you're saying, but in Harlem fought hard and people are buying into the value of culture and looking for the opportunities. So if anybody have something, please give it to me.
So can I, before anyone leaves, I want to say this panel, I've emailed all of you. You all have each other's emails. So just know that, okay? Just want to, and now we can open Q&A. So I'm going to try to do this. We have 15 minutes of Q&A. So I'm going to say, sir, you can do comment. You in the back too. Sir, you can do 3. Yes.
Very much. And come see our show at Marcus Garvey Park the entire month of July, Mount Voleo. All right?
Thank you.
I just really wanted to just make a brief comment.
Sir.
While I'm
Oh, okay.
Power,
Thank you.
concern. One of the things that we have to recognize is that whenever you speak truth to power, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you are the servant of the people. As Christ said, the servant is the greatest servant of humanity. So when you speak truth to power, as I am doing at HPD, when I speak to my supervisors, one, insubordination is not even an option, right? When we tell our labor members, et cetera, in DC 37 and 371, insubordination is not an option. Obstinacy is not an option either when you're speaking to mountains that don't move. But as Christ said, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can say to that mountain, be thou removed, and talk it into existence as John taught us to do. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the same it was in the beginning with God.
Thank you. Number 2 is in the back. Yes.
Gotcha.
And then we're coming up for it.
Hi. I was at the City Hall standing room only hearing when they was talking about the River to River proposal. And the cornerstone of the rezoning revolved around cultural arts. And it's interesting because I live downtown and we fight for the arts. We get hardly anything. But to the west of me, somehow Tribeca has been able to cordon all of the essentials of how to get cultural programming. And they know for a fact that when we talk about qualifying, what it means for the cultural arts in the community, they know their young people need to be nurtured, and to the point where they're getting the money that's supposed to be going to the Lower East Side. And I just want you to know that we find that when it comes to the cultural arts, that lots of times it's used for displacement. They come in, they promise programming, they're there for a short period of time, just so they can build the housing. And then when the housing gets built, somehow the funding magically disappears.
Thank you. It's coming. The mic is coming up front, though. And then I see you in the front. I see you, so you're right after him. Thank you. Nope, it comes here first.
Oh, comes here. Sorry.
Yep.
Thank you, Senator. I've listened to this panel with some frustration because I don't understand what most of what's been said has to do with the preservation of historic buildings. I mean, what will it matter if there is if there are black cultural organizations here, the Schomburg, the Studio Museum, if there are no black people? And if every landmark that we have is destroyed, like our magnificent Beaux-Arts Bank on 125th Street, was that landmark? No, it's going to be torn down. Why couldn't that have been made a headquarters for the Classical Theater of Harlem? People are all the time talking about how terrible it is that the city, by eminent domain, took the houses in Seneca Village to build Central Park. Harlem is Seneca Village. It will disappear without a trace. And as to people, lauding Lincoln Center is great, and it's now a landmark. But we had a magnificent opera house that was famous, and all kinds of famous people had been there. Why wasn't that saved? I just don't get it. The building where Frank's Restaurant was on 125th Street is one of the few cast iron fronted buildings in Upper Manhattan. Is it landmarked? No. There are only 3 landmark buildings on Harlem from river to river. It's insane. All of our black history and culture, it's being destroyed, and people are just happy to have street namings and a few organizations, which, what relevance will they have when this is a mostly white community? And that's where the way in which things seem to be going, as far as I can see.
If you want to respond, or you want to answer.
No, you can. I mean, again,
I just want to think as we talk about this. I think I'm using. Is that better?
Yep.
This one is better. I just think we should try to pick apart the sort of black-white issues and the building issues. And I just want, because I teach real estate at Columbia, one of the things you have to recognize when you protect a building, whether it's for black, white, or other, is that somebody has to then maintain it. There is a cost. There's a cost to write it. There's a cost to run it. There's a cost to keep bits from falling down. Somebody has to assume that cost. There is no government that's going to come in and hold up every historic building. That's not what government does. That's not what our landmarks people do. So if, in fact, we think something should be saved, thinking about a use that fits is very important. And you can't run, I don't know what they need for Classical Theater of Harlem, but it's probably not a bank building. The costs of keeping that would be so much more than an organization like that could maintain. So I just think we should also be practical in marrying up uses in buildings. I'd love to protect all buildings too, but not all uses are right for all buildings. That's all I want to say.
Harlem is a very historic community with buildings that exemplify what Harlem is. And if you say, oh, just knock it down because no one will be able to afford to do that. That's not what they do in their landmark buildings downtown. They don't say, oh, will these people be able to afford to maintain this building? No, they landmark it because it's worthy of protection because of the historic, architectural, and cultural significance that it represents to our city. But in Black communities and communities of color, that has not occurred in an equitable way. And at the rate that they are designating buildings in Upper Manhattan, by the time they get around to all worthy buildings, they'll be torn down. It makes no sense. You just go along with it. I don't get it.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Everything is so much resonating with me. But my name's Deborah Stevens. I am a board member of the New Amsterdam Musical Association. If you have heard of that organization, please raise your hand. Okay, great. NAMA for short. And I asked that because New Amsterdam Musical Association is over 100 years old. It was founded by Black and Hispanic musicians, headed by UB Blake and James Reese Europe, who had just come out of the Army, in 1904, incorporated in 1905, bought the building in 1920. We own the building on 107 West 130th Street. We are a musical cultural organization, and we just got landmarked in 2019. Thank you very much, all you guys who have helped us. Blair has been very helpful, who will be in the breakout. But this organization is run by members. We're here for memberships, and actually last year or this year just got federal funding, just got $35,000 from Landmarks, which is the matching grant, which we are struggling to raise the other half. We've never had to do it, but we are still standing. What the people have done from 1905, and then the building was dormant during the famous crack era. The neighborhood was nearly destroyed. The homeowners on 130th and 131st Street are responsible for most of those brownstones still being there. But we don't know each other. We're having an initiative there should be a question here, I'm sorry, but I just wanted you guys to know that we exist and we're planned to exist. We're strategizing. I'm so glad to have heard about this, how to preserve culture, that people care. I think businesses do care. They have to be shown where to go to care. When you come into a jam session on a Monday night, you walk out somebody else. You have to be inspired. We need inspiration. Yes, we need business. It's all business, the business of life. But inspiration feeds that. And that's your churches, that's your arts, that's your dance, that's your song, that's your music, that's your poem. It's important. It is life. And we can fund it. We've got to stop looking back and create forward. Stop looking at problems, but the good of the solution of the problem. We're focusing on the problem. And over time, things change. 100 years, this building is still standing, and we're fighting the people who put the shedding up in between HPD and them double charging us, and we're charging $5 for you to come in. Sometimes the house is empty, sometimes it's full. I have a few flyers here, but the website is namaharlem.org, and you're all welcome. And the question is, we're not looking for a place. We want to hold on and renovate this place. I mean, some of the walls are lopsided. This is there, the floor is uneven and people donate. We're having a ball and we're building, and you all can join that. Like one of you was saying, we have to support and integrate with one another and share with one another. That's how it's done. My famous quote is, I heard it from somewhere, Harlem is not only a village, it's a feeling. Thank you.
That stopped.
Well, looking at culture and bracketing it in the terms of landmark buildings, I would want to ask if landmarks, if you're looking at landmarking, doesn't Landmark ever step forward and kind of say there's only 4 wooden structures still left in Manhattan? We just need to landmark those. Or these are the famous cultural landmarks of Black life in New York City. You need to landmark those. It's like always putting all the burden on the communities or the players to bring forward. There should be some impetus within the landmarks groups to move those kinds of things forward in a faster way. So we had rezoning on 125th Street. You know, they could make a list doing the rezoning of what buildings would you like to see landmarked. And the community board had a list of all those buildings, and you know, everyone shook their head and, oh yes, this is really wonderful. And the zoning went through, and there, you know, buildings are just lost. Why doesn't that match if zoning can change on one side and people designate landmarking, why aren't they running parallel with one another in terms of approval, as opposed to the changing zoning meant that places were gone? I'm trying to think of the bar. I'm going blank.
No, but
No, Lennox Lounge. And it is not anybody from community board up and down. I would have thought that was a great place. You know, Amanda Burden probably passed it every time she came to do the zoning. And oh yeah, put it on the list, put it on the list. And it's like a fool's joke because the zoning made that go away, made that building go away. Same as Michael was talking about the bank. I'd love to hear from Barbara on 125th Street. What buildings do you see being landmarked on 125th Street so we could rally around making that happen?
okay. So let's start here. I have 5 blocks, Morningside to St. Nicholas, Morningside to Fifth Avenue. Whenever something comes out about 125th Street, whether it's on the west side or the east side, we get blamed for it. We get no. Well, I'm just giving you the reality. The newspaper, everyone does it. 125th Street was named the most dangerous street in the country. But they were talking about 125th and Lexington. So I got calls all over everywhere. The buildings that you just mentioned are on the east side and stuff. And so I'm not involved in that. And that's what I mean when I say we have to come together.
Restaurant building is not on the east side. It's right there near the Apollo Theater.
Oh, you mentioned the bank.
I did mention the
Yes.
bank.
And so what I'm saying here is this is supporting us coming together. Because coming together from river to river. So in the central core, I don't see any buildings other than the one you mentioned about the Frank Sever, where the Frank Severus Writers Workshop used to be.
Well, like the Koch building, they just took the cornice off of that. Here we have this beautiful building going up next door for the Studio Museum. And then the Koch building, which still had its name blazoned in the cornice and all of that all just got ripped off.
Well, yeah, it got ripped off when it was leased. Okay, let's go back a little bit here. Okay, it's landmark preservation isn't just a one person. It's just not a one-all situation. There are a lot of different factors that go into that. Like we start with the Lennox Lounge. It was owned by a Black man. He wanted to sell it, and then so he did, and he sold it to the highest bidder. You're right. It should have been landmarked because then whoever bought it would have been landmarked. When we did the rezoning, landmarking should have been there a part of it. Everyone should know that we are trying to get the rezoning revisited. Landmark should be included on that. And if we didn't put landmark. It has to come from the community. No business person is going to want to put landmark in because the maintenance, which you talk about, is something that they don't want to deal with. And one of the things we have to do is talk truth. You know, but okay, but I am the speaker here right now, and as a community board chair.
Mike, can I just say, I understand you'll be doing closing arguments. This is also closing remarks. This is also our last 2 minutes of this panel.
And I'm answering his question. And so a step forward, number one, get landmarking into the governmental structure, right, where we, with the rezoning, so they can look at it. That's one way, that's a solution. And also start dealing with truth. You need to understand, Showman's is up for sale right now. It's been up for sale. Showman's is up for sale right now. Now, when it happens and nobody of color buy it, we're going to get all these news articles on gentrification. So we got to talk truth on these things as well. M&G Diner.
Please, can we please?
This is.
That's what landmarking is for. It wouldn't matter for landmark. Who owned it?
If I just wanted to mention one closing thing just in support of the speaker here is that landmarks does not preserve a use. We can only landmark the building. So we completely empathize and we're very sensitive to the needs and the desires of a community to want to protect sort of the uses and the areas within a community that draw people in, but we only are limited by the bricks and mortar of the building, unfortunately. That said, any member of the public can submit a request for evaluation that we will look at seriously and in depth. It's not an application to designate, but we will look at it and research it and let you know in writing whether or not we believe it meets the landmarks law. And then that said, I just wanted to again reiterate that West Harlem has been incredible in providing us a ton of information about the neighborhood, and we are currently in the field right now doing a tremendous amount of research, which sometimes takes a tremendous amount of time. And we want to come back and engage with the public on those buildings that we do find to be of merit, of those historic districts we do find to be of merit, because we love that process to move forward once we identify them as well.
So I want to thank everyone on this panel for your valuable insight into all of the processes that happen. I want to thank you for highlighting the conflicts that sometimes occur and also the possible solutions. I want to thank this audience. Our next panel is going to be starting in 5 minutes. Please applaud this panel. Thank you.